Hey everybody, it's Monique with Made with Accuquilt, a friendly support group, and I'm finally back today with the tutorial for the wedding ring, for the double wedding ring die. And so to make the double wedding ring on the Accuquilt die, you actually get two choices, and this is why you have so many shapes on here. And so the traditional wedding ring, double wedding ring, is actually made out of lots of pieces, and your arcs looked like this. Lots of pieces, and that's how you would make that football shape. I'm going to call that the football shape. And so you would sew them together and then put corner pieces on them and then make this football shape and then sew it on to the center like this. But Accuquilt has actually given you the option to just make a solid arc as well. Now the construction of the footballs is exactly the same. The construction of the block is exactly the same. You just save yourself a step by not having to sew these shapes together and using this shape instead. All right, so it's up to you. I think it gives a totally different look. I love the scrappy look of this one. But then when I started playing with the solid arc, I actually really like that too. And you still will need to sew some corner pieces on with a solid arc as well, but you're just saving the step of having to sew 5 of these shapes in here. And so in order to make the scrappy version, you need the most of D, because the center of your footballs here, those are all D's. So the 3 in the middle are D's, and then you have 2 E's, and that's E and E reversed on the outside, and then you have B, and B is basically the square that makes the end of the football. And so for every block, so this is one block basically, so for every block you're going to have to make 4 footballs, and I did write down how much you need for every one of them. Just let me find my little cheat sheet here. So in order to make one complete block, which is using lots of pieces, you will need 1A, which is the centerpiece. You need 4 C's, which are the centers of the footballs. And then you need 8 B's, which are going to be these corner pieces. And you need 8 E's and 8 E reverse, and those are the edge pieces here. And then you need 24 D's, and those are these 3 center ones in every football. So I'm happy to write that down in the comments, if you want to know, but you'll figure this out. It's not hard to do. And so, of course, you save yourself a little bit of time by using solid arcs like this, because then you just have to cut 8 solid arcs and 8 B's, and still one center, still 4 centers of the football. So it's all up to you, what you prefer and what look you prefer and what you want to go for. I just like having the option. And so just remember what I did with my dies. I measure them and then I write on them with chalk marker that I just bought at the dollar store. And I like to write on there how wide it is and how long it is, so I can rough cut my pieces and then lay them on. And remember that your die still has to go through your cutter appropriately, the right way. So my die would go through my cutter this way or all the way this way. So just make sure that you cut your fabric accordingly. And for this one, what I did for my first try, when I did my scrappy one, I just laid long strips on here and then I made them shape D, E, and E reversed and B. And in order to get E reversed, you just fan fold your fabric, of course. You just lay one right side up, one upside down, and then you would get those different looking ones that you need. And in order to keep it straight for myself, I don't know if you can catch this on camera, I actually wrote myself a little piece of paper where I wrote D and then E and E reversed and then B, so that I knew which piece I was grabbing. Now, in order to tell B and E reverse and D apart, it's actually really easy. B is just squares, and these other ones are tapered. And they do look a little bit different, D and E, but the best way that you can tell, they look pretty similar, but the best way you can tell which one is which is that D has notches on all 4 sides. I don't know if you can see that on my hand, but there are some notches on all 4 sides. And on E and E reversed, there is only one at the edge. So here is, well, whichever one you want to call it, E or E reversed, and this is, they are mirror images of each other. So just one notch. So that's how you can tell them apart too. But I think it's just easier to make a little pile of D's, E's and E reversed, and then B's, so that you know which one to grab. So if you're not going to do all these to make the centers, you're still going to have to cut B, and you're still going to have to cut C, and you're going to have to cut F. So go ahead and just measure those and then write the measurements somewhere so it's easy for you to remember. And then for the center, for A, this is basically 10 inches square. So you could even use, you know, your pre-cuts for this if you wanted to. I just cut myself my yardage, but you could use a pre-cut if you'd like to, because those are 10 inches square. All right, so I am going to go ahead and I'm going to cut everything I need for my block, and then I'll meet you back over here. All right, so I've cut my needed pieces, and I do want to point out that I have made so many attempts at this block. It's not a super easy one, just to be honest here. And so I decided that I'm gonna go with the solid arc, just because it would take me less time to sew them all together. But your construction will be exactly the same, all right? And what I found when I first tried my scrappy version, I was sewing, or I was pressing the seams open, but I found that when I was trying to ease these curves, because you'll be sewing curves, that sometimes my seams were pulling open a little bit. And so I thought I didn't want to compromise the seams at all. And so I started pressing all my seams in one direction, and I think that's going to make it a little bit stronger. So anyway, so the construction is exactly the same. You're either going to piece your arcs or you're going to use solid arcs, but everything else is going to be exactly the same. And I've already cheated a little bit because I already started making this block with solid arcs. And so what I need to do, I've made 2 footballs, and I need to make 2 more in order to finish my block. And so what I need to construct my football, I decided that my football was going to have blue on the left-hand side and red on the right-hand side. And so I need this center shape here. And if it's important to you, if you're using directional fabric, you want to pay attention to which way these melon shapes are facing. So I'm going to face mine towards the outside. And then I need my solid arc, which is going to go here. And then I want red on this corner, and I want blue on this corner, and those are all shape B. And then I need another solid arc over here. And for my fabric, I'm not worried about direction. If you are, then you want to make sure that you lay your fabric on your die the correct way. Mine were just fan folded, and so I was able to cut 4. And, you know, so this is how this is going to work. And as you can see how it's supposed to come together. And so what you're going to start with is by sewing your first arc to the melon shape. And there are notches here. There's a notch here and there's a notch here, and you definitely want those 2 to match. But as you can tell, the rest is like, how is that going to work? And I tried various different methods. I tried pinning everything like we had done with our other curved dies. I tried gluing some. I tried some pin and some glue. I tried not gluing anything, because I saw some videos where people said you don't need to pin anything. And certainly not pinning makes things way faster. It actually was almost easier than pinning and pinning and pinning. So I'm going to recommend that maybe you don't pin, or maybe just put a pin right at the notch, because what you want to do is you're going to want to basically start sewing here, and this corner piece has to match up with this corner piece here. Okay, I hope that you can see that. So that is going to fasten right there. And it definitely is easier to put a little bit of glue. I used a June Taylor fabric glue stick that I stuck a little bit of glue on there, and then I ironed it down to dry it. And that kept it in place rather than having to use a pin. Because when you stick this under your needle, it's kind of hard to hold it in place. So if you want to use some glue there to get it started so that you don't have to get your fingers in the way or no pins, that's really a great idea. And then what you're going to do, you're going to sew around, and you're going to sew slowly. Believe me, you're going to sew slowly, but you're going to sew. And then as you're sewing, you're going to ease this piece of melon around to match with the arc. And you are aiming to get these notches to line up. And you're just going to keep sewing a 1/4 inch seam, and you're going to just keep easing it and easing it and easing it until you get to the end, and hopefully everything comes out perfectly. Now when you get to the end, it's again going to be kind of hard to keep that in place, and you can use a stiletto. But what somebody actually recommended, one video that I watched, she actually uses some tweezers, and then she held everything in place with tweezers. And I tried that, and that actually worked really, really well. So I suggest that you try what works best for you. Maybe you want to pin, and if you're gonna pin, then I would recommend you start by pinning here, and then pinning the edge, and then pinning everywhere in between, like we did with our drunkard's path die. But also give it a try just not pinning at all, and maybe just using some glue to keep this corner where it's supposed to start. You know, you might find some things work better for you than other things, and it's worth giving different things a try. So you're going to start by sewing this arc to the melon piece, and then you're going to sew your piece B's, both of them, to the end of your solid arc, the other solid arc. And the B's sewing onto the solid arc is super easy because they line up. They're straight. You know, there's nothing to worry about. And I pressed mine towards the B's. Yes, I did. And so you're just going to sew those and then press them. And then when those two pieces are done, then you are ready to sew them together into this football shape, okay? So I don't think that this is the trickiest part. Certainly this arc with the two B's sewn on is the easiest. This one is going to be a little more tricky. One other hint that I want to tell you is that I was always taught that you sew with your baggy piece on the bottom, baggy bottoms. And so this is definitely your biggest piece, your baggy piece. And so I recommend that you sew with that one on the bottom. So the arc goes on the bottom and the melon piece goes on the top. So try various things. Maybe don't use your most precious fabric right away. Just try what works well for you, and just take your time. This is not a project where you're gonna like just rush through, in my opinion. You want to take your time to sew it slowly. And I'm trying to think, for these ones I actually press towards the arc, but you can press whatever direction it wants to lay flat, in my opinion. All right, so I am going to sew these. I'll bring my camera over to my machine, and then hopefully you'll be able to see how it works without any pinning at all, and fingers crossed that that works well. I decided to just throw in a quick video showing you where I exactly placed my glue, just in case you weren't able to see that in the other video because it was kind of far away. So I have my arc and my melon piece, and I have this June Taylor fabric glue stick that I bought from Accuquilt. I think any glue stick probably would work. This one is temporary adhesive and washes out. I mean, I think most glue sticks are going to be temporary and will wash out, but up to you what you want to do. So basically you take the lid off and you just put a little bit of glue in the corner, and it actually, this one's nice because it goes on purple, and it was on clearance in case you were interested. So here is my melon piece, and there is my glue, and I want to line this edge piece up. And so I am going to lay it down like this, where my corner pieces are matching perfectly. Hopefully you can see that. So my corner is matching this corner perfectly, and it lays flat against the raw edge here. And so then in order to just make that stay, you just use a warm iron and just help it dry, and that should hold it. I actually was amazed that when you start pulling, that this doesn't pull loose, but I only had that happen once, and so it's actually pretty sticky. And so now that I have glued this and I have dried it, I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew this curve all the way around to this piece here. Okay, so I will meet you over at my sewing machine. Back at the sewing machine now, and I have glued my melon piece to the edge of the arc, and I'm going to start sewing, and fingers crossed everything works well. So I'm going to lower my needle at the 1/4 inch mark, and I'm going to start sewing. And so I'm going to sew for a little bit because my melon piece and my arc piece are actually lined up, so I actually don't have to do anything for a little bit. But then when it starts to veer away from the arc, now I'm going to have to start manipulating my melon piece. And you'll be able to just kind of tell when you have to start doing that. You know, you want to sew far enough that your melon piece is fastened to your arc up there, but you also want to start easing it so that the raw edges match up. So you can just kind of keep an eye on that, and then I just like to kind of see, okay, is it now time for me to start easing these together? So I feel like it is. And so I'm trying to make sure that my 2 notches here are going to end up nicely on top of each other. And so if you want to, you could put a pin in there, but then it might kind of make it more difficult to maneuver up here. So try and see what works best for you. I hope my fingers are not in your way, but okay, so now I'm going to turn it a little bit more, and you see how this is a fair, for me anyway, it's a pretty pokey process. And I'm hoping not to sew any wrinkles. I don't want wrinkles. Okay, I have now lined up my 2 notches, but I have a lot of fabric right here, and I want to make sure I do not sew a wrinkle in. So I might just gonna pull over this direction and try and flatten out my fabric as much as I can. Like I said, this is not, well, sewing curves is always going to be a little more tricky, and this is not a block to make if you're in a hurry to make a quilt, in my opinion. Maybe if you have lots of experience, then you can just whip this out, but if it's your first time, just take your time. Just be prepared. It's going to take you some time to do this. Okay, I hope that you can kind of see what I'm doing here. So I'm taking a few stitches, and then I'm trying to just ease my white fabric, my melon fabric, around to match the raw edge of my arc. And now when I'm getting to this point, I definitely want this point to match up with this point over here. So I definitely am going to start paying attention to if it's going to match up or not. And I'm easing it around and easing it around some more. Now, someone in one video that I was watching, she said the footballs are pretty forgiving when you're sewing them. So I hope that's true. All right, so I find I still need to do a few more stitches, just not worrying about getting this piece onto the corner. And you can just keep trying that and see when you're ready for it to start curving. All right, so now I have curved it around. It's not going to line up perfectly, I can tell that already, but it's pretty good. And so I'm keeping an eye on my fabric under my needle, making sure that it's not going to sew a wrinkle in it. And now, because now it's going to get hard for me to keep this in place, is when I'm going to grab my tweezers and I'm going to pull this over to the corner, to the edge, and if I can, I'm going to grab both of them there. I got both of them now, so now I don't have to worry about sewing my fingers, and I'm going to try and hold on to that as long as I can to sew to the edge. Okay, I think that was not too bad. All right, so I've sewn the melon to the arc, and let's have a look and see how it looks. Okay, I don't see any wrinkles in there, so that's good. And I'm going to go and press it and I'm going to press it towards my melon piece, and I think that actually looks pretty good. And you'll notice that you have about a 1/4 inch seam where the arc is bigger on both sides, and that is correct. That's the way it should be. So I'm going to go and press this, and I'm going to sew the B shapes to my other arc, and then I'll show you how I put the whole entire football together. I have both my pieces here, both my arc. So my one arc that's sewn to the melon piece, and then the arc that has the B pieces sewn to the end. And so now what we have to do, we have to sew these two together. And there are 2 notches here, so I definitely want to match these up. But as you can tell, we're going to start with a straight side, 2 straight sides, and then we're going to have this arch and then some more straight side here. So what you want to do at first is to just take your seam, and for this one I press it towards the melon, and for this one I press it towards the B, towards the square. And so you want to take your seams and you want to line them up. So if you've pressed them in opposite directions, it's going to be easier for you to nest them. And so I can feel that they are perfectly lined up here. And that's that's what you want to do. Let me just fix that again. All right. So I am lining up my raw edges of B and my other arc, and then I can feel that my seams are nesting in here. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to sew from here to here, and I'm going to land my needle right at that spot where the 2 seams nest. All right, and then I'm going to stop and I'm going to pivot. And so I have my melon piece on the top. This is going to be my tighter piece, and my baggy bottoms are at the bottom here. And so I'm going to start sewing a 1/4 inch seam over here, and I'm going to sew to where my seams intersect, leave my needle down, and then I'm going to start sewing this curve to here. All right. If you would like to put a pin in that, not a bad idea at all. I think I'll follow that advice. One of the videos I did see, somebody said that sewing the arcs and the footballs are pretty forgiving. So let's hope that's true. All right, so I have that pin, so I know where to stop with my needle down, and I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch seam. Okay, I'm getting close there, so I'm going to sew a little slower so I don't sew over my mark. And by the way, if you would prefer to sew with pins in there, I did that with my first block, and I put a million pins in, and I left them in as I was sewing. Most sewing machines, I think, will be okay as long as you're going slowly. Your needle shouldn't break as long as you're going slowly. When your needle hits a pin, it should slide to one side or the other. So if you prefer to sew with pins in there when you're doing curves, try it and leave the pins in and just go slowly, and I think it'll work okay. All right, so I've reached a point where my seams are nesting, and so now I'm going to pull my pin out of here, and now I'm going to maneuver so that my white melon piece is lining up with my arc. And unfortunately, it's probably going to be really hard for you to see, and it's a bit finicky. You're trying to just kind of move things out of the way, and just, you know, it's I would not recommend this block to a beginner. Let's put it that way. All right, so now I'm going to maneuver it around, and I'm going to keep trying to line up my raw edges on my melon and on my arc the same way that we did when we sewed the first arc to the melon piece. Now I know that I want my 2 notches to line up, and here is one of them and here's the other, so they're looking pretty good already, but I'm not going to worry about them too much yet because I still have all this other fabric that I need to ease in first. Okay, so now I'm going to start pulling on my upper fabric just a little bit to make sure that I can match up my notches. Hopefully I can make that work. That's pretty good. Looking pretty good. All right, it's not going to be perfect, but good enough. All right, and now I'm going to just keep on sewing my 1/4 inch seam while I'm easing my lemon shape around my arc, trying to keep my raw edges lined up perfectly. And I am sewing to where my other seams are going to be intersecting. So I do want to start paying attention and seeing where those two need to meet. But I'm also keeping an eye on my raw edges here because they also need to match up. So it's looking pretty good. But we'll see when we take it out from under the needle. We'll see how good it looks then. All right. I have to just maneuver this a little bit. I'm trying to keep this edge lined up while I'm trying to line up my seams, and it's a bit tricky. Don't be afraid to manhandle your block. And this is why you want to have your seams be pressed to one side if you're using the pieced arc, because you are going to have to manhandle it a little bit to keep it in place. All right. I am trying to line up my seams here. I don't know that I did a very good job with that, but anyway, I got to that where I'm hoping the seams sort of intersect, and now I'm going to line up my 2 straight edges here, B and the arc, and now I'm going to sew the rest of it in just a straight line. There is no curve over here, so I'm not sure that that is going to be a perfect match at that seam, but let's have a look. Let's have a look and see what happened. Nope, that is not a perfect seam. This side, pretty darn good. This side, very off. So that means that we're going to rip that one out and we're going to try again. All right, I went ahead and I unpicked my seam that didn't match up very well, and so they now look much better. The melon shape in the middle is a little bubbly, which is concerning to me, but I'll just say it'll quilt out, which you're not supposed to do, but it will. But what I was thinking about, I was actually laying awake at night trying to figure out how I could make this easier when you're sewing this big arc onto the smaller melon shape. And I know yesterday I showed you that what I did, let me see if I can turn this around. What I did, I would sew from here to here, stop my needle in the seam where the seams met, and then twisted it around, and then sewed around the curve, and then went again to where the seams met, and then twisted it, and then sewed it straight along there. But that's really tricky to do, or at least it's really tricky for me to do. So I was laying in bed overnight thinking, how would this be easier? And so I just tried this method, and you might want to give that a try as well. And it might work better for you than, than the other method. So what I did, I actually sewed just like yesterday, like I showed you. I started sewing along the B and the arc, and just sewed until I got to that intersecting seam allowance where I had to put a pin. And then I went around and I sewed and I sewed and I sewed, and I actually sewed a little bit past where my notches did not meet, but where they're supposed to meet. And then I just tied off my thread. And then what I did, I took it out from my machine and then I turned it around, and then I actually started sewing from the other end again so that I was able to match up my seams and nest them really nicely here. So what I did first, I sewed from here to past where my notches met, and then I took it out and then started sewing from the other side. And so I was able to match up my seam much nicer and then sew to where I had stopped sewing. Okay, so it's a little bit more work, But if you see how much nicer the seams now line up, this one's still not perfect, but I've already told you that if you want perfect in this block, then I don't know. I'm not sure that perfect is a possibility. I'm hoping good enough is good enough. But that worked much better for me. So if you're having issues lining up those B shapes with the arcs, then try that method. So sew it partially, tie off your thread, and then go the other direction and then see if that works better for you. I think that is going to be a game changer for me, and I hope it'll help you too if you're having issues matching those seams up. I am ready to sew my last two football shapes onto my center A shape. And I've already sewn two of them on, but I want to show you what it looks like when you start with nothing on there. So I'll use this corner here. So what you want to do on the back of your A shape, you want to mark a 1/4 inch mark. And so I went in a 1/4 inch from the end and a 1/4 inch from the side, and I marked a dot. And I did that on all 4 of my corners, except you can't see the others anymore because I've already sewn my footballs on there. But go ahead and do that on all 4 of your corners, and that is going to give you your starting mark. Because you want to, as you can see, these ones, we want to line this one up with here, but this one has nothing to line up with. And when you first start sewing your footballs onto your A shape, you won't have anything to line up with it. So what you want to do is push your pin, and if you want to, you could mark a 1/4 inch in from here. I'm just going to eyeball it, and I'm going to push a pin through my 1/4 inch seam. I think that's pretty good. And then what I want to do is I want to match that up with my 1/4 inch mark on my fabric. And actually, when I lift up my fabric, it's sunny enough outside today that I can actually see it on the other side. Well, pretty close. I bet you that my 1/4 inch seam over here on my fabric is off a little bit. So you're going to match that up, and then I know that is where my A shape has to go. Do you see how that is about a 1/4 inch past the seam allowance over here? And so I can glue that, or I can pin that to keep that where it's supposed to be. I think I'm just going to pin because my pin's in the right spot. And now I'm going to start sewing right here, and I'm going to sew all along, easing my fabric and trying to match up my notch on my football and my notch in my A shape. And I'm going to go all the way around. And then if I cannot easily match up this seam with this seam, because I do have a seam here already, then I'm going to go ahead and just do the same thing as I did with my football shape, and just take it out from under my needle and start again from this side. So I will start sewing, and then I'll see if I can line it up over here, because here you want to line up your 2 seam allowances and nest them. But if I have a hard time feeling that because it's stuck under my machine, I might just go ahead and pull it out again, and then start from this side and then sew back to where I finished. So let me give that a try, and then we'll see how that goes. I went ahead and I just sewed my football on using the last method that I described to you. So I sewed from here to a little bit past the notches, took my work out, and then sewed from this side back to match where I had stopped sewing. And that worked perfectly. Look at how beautifully these seams line up on the B pieces, and look at this nice point on my A piece. And so it's worked much better for me than my last time when I tried sewing my footballs together, because I actually had some of A showing and my B pieces did not line up very well. So I definitely recommend that you sew your football on partially, take your work out, and then sew again from the other side, and then you'll have these hopefully perfectly matching seams. All right, so I'm just going to check that I'm still recording here. Okay, and so now it's time for me to sew on my very last football. And you do want to pay attention to how you sew your footballs on. I'm trying to have alternating red and blue B pieces, and so sewing it on like this would not work. So do pay attention to that. So I want to sew mine on this direction. And so what I'm going to do, you want to make sure that your A piece is really nice and pressed. I think that's part of the problem with my seam over here, the A kind of popped out of there. It probably wasn't pressed very flat, and so it popped out. So do make sure, maybe use some starch or something like that if you want to, that it's really out of the way and that it really gets caught in between your seams. So I'm going to do the same thing to fasten my very last football, and I'm going to grab a pin, and I'm going to pin about a 1/4 inch in from the edge on my seam allowance. I'm going to push that pin right through, and I'm going to go into my seam allowance, and I'm going to catch fabric A in between my red and my blue piece. And so these should line up very nicely, corner to corner and edge to edge, and they do. And so I am going to just fasten that pin down in there. It's in the seam allowance on the red side, it's on the seam allowance on this side, and I'm going to start sewing. I'm going to ease this along, hopefully match my notches, and then I'm going to pull it out, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to just match up my seams with a pin and then sew again from this side, and I'll probably flip my work over. So I will see you back here after I sew this down. I am so happy to be done with this project, quite honestly. I think it turned out pretty darn good. It's not perfect, but I have a feeling that with this block, you might want to be happy with good enough. My A's and B, or my B's, lined up really pretty nicely once I started sewing them partially, and I think that that really is the best hint I can give you for making this block. And now remember that if you want to piece your arcs, that everything's going to work exactly the same way. You're just starting with a pieced arc rather than a solid arc, but everything else is still going to need to be done the same way. So I hope that this tutorial has been helpful to you. You know, good luck is all I can say.